Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start at about 2 to 3 minutes after the hour to make sure we get everybody in, settled in and comfortable before we kick off. Thanks for being with us today. Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another webinar Wednesday. John Splone here, your host. Today with us, we have Arctic Wolf. So we will be talking with them about their solution, how they can have an impact and support and services for you as far as security is involved within your environments. So before we get started with that, I want to go ahead and kick off about us at XenTegra. If you've been with us a few times here, then you know me, you know XenTegra, but you're going to get to learn it all over again. I do want to mention that we do have a giveaway today. We'll be having some poll questions, so make sure you participate. That's what is going to get you entered into the drawing. After we get wrapped up, you'll get notified by Arctic Wolf, and you'll be able to win an Ember mug. So a little about XenTegra. We are a solutions provider within the environments of technology focused around the digital workspace desktop transformation. We're a reseller VAR with all of our solution partners. We provide services from professional services for implementation, support, and also managed services, as well as our hosting services. We can support you on-prem and traditional deployments. We can also support you within a cloud deployment at the cloud platform levels from the Azures, the XenTegra Cloud Connect environment, as well as our AWS and Google solutions that are out there. We have an extensive and vast experience technically as far as it relates to desktop transformation and the virtual workspace environment. I believe it's over 700 years right now. I know myself personally, 25 plus years. So you're in good hands with some of the resources that we have here. Now, XenTegra itself, Andy Whiteside is our CEO, who founded it, saw a lack in the community of enablement. Enablement for you, the customer, for the partners, to make sure that we've really helped you and understood and listened to what solutions you have, what solutions you're looking for, and how you're trying to solve it. We have many partners we work with within this realm and the experience to go with that to make sure that we're making recommendations, allowing you to have more strategery as we move forward within delivering a secure environment and also a stable environment, which we ultimately want to lead to user productivity and their users getting to the data, being able to enhance what those services are that your users provide. We handle micro assessments for our solutions as well. If you go to the XenTegra.com website, you'll be able to see our micro assessments that we offer and the areas that we do from a networking side of the house, Citrix VMware hosting, vast depth of the actual micro assessments. These are high level. We don't really get into weeds. We spend about a half day with you, but we dig through, give you a SWOT analysis on your environment, make recommendations, and help you be able to understand what you have and where you need to go a little bit better than just kind of going into it blindly. Again, like I said, managed services, we have our team we work with there to be able to manage, host, and maintain your environment, whether it's in your data center or in the cloud. Our consulting services, we have resources for implementation and professional services. And as a reseller, we work with many partners such as Arctic Wolf, who we have with us today. Now, myself, I'm a knucklehead that, like I said, 25 plus years. I live in Baltimore, do work remotely. And honestly, I've worked remotely for pretty much the past 13 years. So that goes to show how that digital workspace can enhance a user's experience with an environment. I truly haven't had an office for 13 years. So that's pretty rare. So I was doing it the cool way before the pandemic. I've been an evangelist within the environments focused around cloud services. And when I say enlightenment is I continue to educate myself. I continue to try to understand how cloud can enhance our business services and how we can leverage that to be able to provide more of your operational cost versus a capital investment in hardware solutions that are out there, just because you're going to be operating versus having to maintain and operate. Again, with recently I came from Citrix, where I worked in the worldwide technical enablement as it relates to EUC in the cloud and Citrix cloud services. I worked there handling technical training for internal resources at Citrix, both from our consulting services, pre-sales, working with our partners on education, as well as the customers out there in the environment. I've had a broad spectrum of experience all the way from the knucklehead, doing the low-level management, the whole .com environment, going through everything, architectural design, enablement, and consulting. For a little bit about me, I love my dad jokes. I make sure that my kids are truly embarrassed by me as much as possible on a daily basis. And I find that zenness between geek and nerd to be able to be happy at what I do and then also be happy at life. So with that said, what I want to do here is introduce my friends over at Arctic Wolf, who will take over at this point and be able to have our discussion a little bit further. Brian, I appreciate you having time to be here today. If you want to, you and Vic want to take over on presenting, then we can go ahead and get kicked off here.
Sounds great. I'm just sharing my screen right now. Hopefully y'all can see that.
Yep, we got it fine.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. And as John mentioned, we're excited to partner together. We're excited to be here in front of this audience. I'm Vic Wiesner from Arctic Wolf, and just quick emceeing the rest of this session. So as you just heard from John, going to hear from Brian Rawls next, and then we're going to do a little Q&A, make it fun and interactional, and then we'll talk about the raffle at the end. So Brian Rawls, cybersecurity advisor at Ingram Micro, and a little bit about Ingram Micro as well. They're an IT and services global organization that delivers supply chain services to businesses around the world with over 23,000 employees. And Brian Rawls is a cybersecurity advisor, and he sees the overall threat landscape from a very unique vendor agnostic lens, which I think you'll really appreciate during today's session. Brian has held several technologist roles over the last 16 years and is a current member of the InfraGard, which is a partnership between the FBI and members of the private sector for the U.S. for the protection of the U.S. critical infrastructure. Through seamless collaboration, InfraGard connects owners and operators within critical infrastructure to the FBI to provide education, information sharing, networking, and workshops on emerging technologies and threats. So without further ado, I will pass this off to Brian.
Thanks, Vic. Appreciate that. So John said I'll start with a little personal too, because he did a little personal. I too have 3 children. So I too enjoy the bad jokes as well. So we'll start that off, which I wasn't anticipating, but it's a good little story. So everybody gives you their cybersecurity statistics and everything else. I have a very short little story on how to address security and understanding of security. So my son now is 5 years old. At the age of 2.5, my wife was at work and I was watching the kids on my day off. And I was in just the other room 10 feet away. I heard the stove start to click. So run in the kitchen, because this has never happened before. His favorite stuffed animal is in a foot of flames on top of our stove. So I swat this into the sink and spray it down. It smells like burnt rubber. Didn't know that kids' toys were made of napalm, but it seems to be that way. Never did this before is kind of where my point is here. What I surmised was he put his stuffed animal on the burner in order to turn the knob, and that's what caught the stuffed animal on fire. So based on how this is an analogy for security is, he has never touched the stove ever in his entire life. And this caused a big fire that could have been very catastrophic if I wasn't there. So you have to kind of think of cybersecurity and security the same way as cybersecurity. Just because it's never happened before doesn't mean it's not going to happen, and you never know when it's going to happen. That's kind of how I want to bring this into what I'm talking about today. And thank you for the intro very much there on all the different statistics that I have on my background and stuff. So the first piece here, obviously we have 8 categories. We're going to kind of go through all this. Some of the threat landscapes and different things in the market that I'm really seeing. One of them, the big ones being, is zero trust. It's been mentioned several different times. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is. Is it a product? It is, but there's multiple products. But it's really a combination of many things. It's kind of like a philosophy of all the different pieces of what zero trust encompasses. So the real premise of zero trust is assume that everything is hostile, which is what zero trust really is. So this is consumed by, if anybody follows the NIST frameworks, they actually have a guide for zero trust, the 800-207 standard. So if you want to do some research on controls around this, they're all there for you to look at. I'm just going to cover this as a very high level understanding today. So what we really want to look at is what are the components of zero trust. So encryption is a big piece of that. Privilege access management is a big piece of that. The data packets and visibility as they come across our appliances. We need to understand where and what the encrypted traffic looks like, even though it's encrypted. We have threat assessments for user behavior, threat assessments for network behavior, and then we have to tie that all into user education, documentation, policy-driven definitions, so we understand all the different elements and how to put this really together. So a lot of big terms there. I'm going to kind of go through each one of those and understand why we're mentioning these and why they're part of zero trust. And there's a whole bunch of vendors that address this. As Vic mentioned, I'm vendor agnostic. I just want to make sure you understand the category and the things that we should be pulling into this, not necessarily the vendor space or who's the best in those areas at all. So the first element here is encryption. So if you encrypt the data, or the encrypted data is in your files and folders, when a hacker comes in and sees encrypted data, it's essentially worthless to them. So by encrypting that data and then using other elements like who has access to that data to unencrypt it for their use, you make that information less of a target for a hacker that might get in that environment. So that's really where the encryption piece falls into that. Privilege access management, just what it sounds like. it insulates the administrators and the people that have access to that data to only be able to be allowed to have access to that data, that application, and nothing but. Like I said, it's assume everything is hostile, everyone is hostile. So let's limit what they're access to do their job functions and only their job functions. And that's a big piece of the privilege access and even like admin remote access to make sure we're not allowing lateral breach if credentials are lost. They shouldn't have access to certain elements that they're not responsible for because that's how that can spread as well. It's hardening it to a point that they can only do their job functions. Now, the bad part of this is it doesn't make everybody happy, but it makes everybody really secure. So we have that back and forth that I talk about a lot. And that's usually the conversation as well. You're not going to make every user happy, but I'll tell you what, you will be more secure than the most of the ones that are out there. So packet visibility. Everybody knows of HTTPS traffic. It's encrypted traffic, SSL, TLS type traffic. Inherently, it's encrypted. So the only way we can get to that information to see if there's a threat within is to de-encrypt that traffic. So there's different appliances and hardware and virtual instances that are purposely made to do what's sometimes referred to as deep packet inspection. Can be inherently in firewalls, even though it degrades the boxes dramatically, so you have to size appropriately. It can actually unencrypt, get visibility into those packets, and re-encrypt that to make sure that what is passing through is not malicious. And that's something that needs to be done for anything that is encrypted coming through. UEBA, that's the behavioral analysis of the users themselves. So we want to look at those and have tools to identify users, identify groups, what entity do they belong to, what are they accessing, and use that to establish baselines. The time of day, applications, VLAN segmentation, they may be part of what groups, and then ultimately it's a behavioral based approach. So the more it learns, the better it gets to understand how things are. And it's going to identify those things that are completely out of scope. If you're logging in at 4 o'clock in the morning and you usually log in between 8 and 5, it's going to flag you, not necessarily directly, but it's going to start seeing these patterns that maybe you're just a light sleeper and that's when you wake up and do your work. That might be an anomaly, but it starts to identify these as this is normal behavior. Same thing we're going to do with the traffic management as well, and visibility and analytics around that traffic. It's going to focus on machine interactions. What is that machine, that device accessing based on that user that is now part of that privilege access management system that we're putting all together. So now it's all pulling all these different elements together to device, user, access levels, encryptions. All that is really going to be put together for the zero trust component. And then finally, the final strategy of this is we're going to educate those users, as I mentioned to begin with. We're going to do policy definitions. We're going to do all these different components, all these softwares, all the things that I just mentioned, the encryption, the front end to the back end, data recovery strategies, just to make sure that everything's covered top to bottom for hardening these environments. And that's really high level, kind of what zero trust is. And I'll pause there for a second. If there's any questions or anything like that, just let me know or I'll continue on.
We're doing good, Brian. And then I just want to point out, anybody has any questions, please go ahead and post them in the Q&A. But thanks, Brian.
Yep, yeah. Thank you. Perfect. So next category here is cybersecurity insurance. I've been hearing this a lot lately, and it changes quite often. Cybersecurity last few years, prior to all these ransomware attacks, was a lot easier to gain policies based on security functions in these environments. But because there's been so many breaches and so much ransomware and so many payments of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, the providers of cybersecurity insurance have gotten a lot more strict about giving policies. And it's almost impossible without the certain controls in place to gain a policy or have it written for you. So the thing that I really recognize, and if you're familiar, the CIS top 20 controls, the top 5 controls, which I'll talk about in a second here, is really going to be required to be in place for a cybersecurity insurance provider to write you a policy. So these controls consist of, and let me read these off to make sure I got them right in my notes here, is multi-factor authentication, and that is for your remote access controls. So that's very important. If you are an admin and you remote in or you get alerts by some of these systems and you're remoting in, we have to make sure that's in place and those controls and multi-factor in place on those, not just password protected. EDR, so endpoint detection and response. This is a tool built, if you're not familiar with it, it's an analytic tool for analysts. It's specifically meant to be noisy in these environments because it's pulling every little thing it can possibly pull off those endpoints in order to understand and gain visibility into all actions happening on that. That is a second requirement in the CIS top 5. Then we have secure and encrypted backups. If for some reason something does happen, and like I said, this is like a 2.5-year-old with a fire on the stove with a stuffed animal. Just because it didn't happen, it doesn't mean it's not going to. No matter how many proactive things you put in front of it, you still want secure backups to restore if something happens. So the biggest piece of that, and I'll add a little bit to that, is something's going to happen. You can reduce the risk, the odds of it happening, but it's to be prepared when it does to restore things more effectively as if you're not prepared. So that's where the backups and making sure they're secured so those also don't get infected or hacked as well. Those privileged access controls that I mentioned prior with Zero Trust, that's a big piece of this. You have to make sure all those are in place. The user can only access what the user is allowed to in the specific groups and the specific device that they're allowed to on that net. And then finally, which is very common, your email filtering protections, your web security and filtering protections on those as well. And that would really encompass the first 5 things that an insurer would actually want you to be able to understand. And those environments are covered and they're monitored to make sure that once something does happen, someone knows what to do with it and take action and do remediation. Now, the keep in mind piece of cybersecurity, because these policies will not cover the ransoms themselves if it's ransomware. And I'm focusing on ransomware because it is the most prevalent still, it's the most talked about still. It will cover things like lawyers' fees. It'll cover things like forensics to actually understand what happened in those environments up to a certain level based on that policy itself. It does not cover the ransom itself. And that's very important to know. So when you get these policies, and the bad guys are bad, but they're business-like. So nowadays, if there is a ransom and they want to make sure that they're good hackers and they restore your systems or unencrypt data, they're going to make sure they do so, because the next person they hacked, if it's known that they did not restore those, it's less likely for someone to pay that ransom. So they're good hackers that they're going to release your information for the most part, but it's not guaranteed. But they want to get paid. It's a business model, and we're going to get into that as well. But that's really how this works and why insurers, cybersecurity insurers, will not cover the payment itself, because they're getting higher and higher, and it's how much is your data worth to you. Just on another note, and I hope I don't go too long. They research each and every company, each person. I've actually had an individual person hacked. That was kind of a famous person I can't mention, but they make sure and research that the amount of the requested ransom is able to be paid by that company or that individual. So they know how much money you have available at that time. So just keep that in mind. They are very smart. They're always ahead of the game. Next topic I'll jump into, we'll maybe do some questions after this one as well, if there are any. Next category is staffing. How do we find, retain, motivate these individuals? So this isn't an exact science. It's just happening right now, especially in cybersecurity. So currently, negative unemployment rate with cybersecurity professionals. You cannot find them. And if you do find them, they're very hard to keep and they're very expensive. So how do we keep these people? How can we afford to have these people? So as I said, they are demanding higher salaries because there's a shortage, just like everything else right now. If there's a shortage, it drives the prices up. hate to use it as an analogy, but that's really how everything works right now, housing and food prices and everything else. If you're a smaller company, then you're still competing with the larger companies that might have more funding for these available professionals versus you trying to get the same talent as those. So you have to compete with people like that are in the industry. So it's really hard for even smaller companies to obtain these individuals. So once you do find something, how do we keep them once we have them on board? And this is stuff that I've learned from talking with customers and different partners that I work with on a regular basis. And these are kind of things they mentioned to me. So the ones that keep people is they really show a great work-life balance. So that's a big piece. If you want to retain something, make your work-life balance better than the guy that's paying more, because some people will go with a lower salary if that gives them more free time and flexibility in their day to do their job as well as have a family. So that's a big piece that was mentioned several times that we noted first. Work environment itself. If you're going into an office, make sure that you can collaborate with others, make sure that it's welcoming, it's the environment, it's, the appealness, the other employees they have to work with, make sure that is all nice, friendly, everybody works together, everybody's a team player. It encourages them to stay and not as easy to leave if they decide to leave for higher pay at some point. Remote hybrid environments. I know with Ingram, I have hired or had 22 interviews to hire the last 8 employees that we've put together. And the biggest question most people are, is this a remote position? Is this a hybrid work environment? How does that work? And we've had people that say, oh, if I've got to come into the office, I'm not interested, and they'll walk away. So hybrid, I kind of like the hybrid. I go in the office every once in a while, but it's my choice versus having the official desk and having to drive back and forth, or full remote. So it really depends. Sometimes those are factors for more people you're bringing in, depending how they prefer to work. So that's an option. As far as retaining or hiring people, which is hard to find for small businesses, is the new method is to find entry-level, out of college type people that really need to gain experience and then train them up yourselves. So caveats and notes on that piece, that's what we've done. But at Ingram Micro, we make sure that they have an understanding of what their job role is, their function. We do put a retainer type thing in place that, no non-compete for a year. So if we hire you, we got to make sure we're not going to lose you after we educate you, because now you're more valuable. So we might put that in place. Another tactic I heard a partner of ours use was, yeah, we train them. We give them the same retention, piece that we just did with the 1 year, but we also tie a number to what the training we provided them is worth, and they have to repay it if they leave within whatever time constraints that you put in place. So that was effective. It's not always the best way to go about things, but it helps retain people, especially ones you're going to take a lot of time to, effort and train them up to get them up to speed before they want to walk out the door for a higher salary. So I'll stop there. Just come see if there's any questions or any comments that we might want to add to that.
Looks like we're pretty open on the question side of the house, Brian.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good.
Yeah,
So
Brian, I'll add, I just thought that was a really interesting strategy around retaining staff, putting that non-compete. Maybe everyone is doing that and I just didn't know about it, but I thought that's pretty unique. But I love that, the kind of having to pay back the certifications that they've retained while working for the organization. I think for enterprises like, those on this call, that's a very interesting tactic. So thanks, Brian, for sharing that.
Great. No, thanks, Vic. Good addition there. I like the color. But yeah, that was directly from another customer, another partner that I was out there. So these are strategies that are being used. So a lot of my information is pulled from is direct conversation, pain points I hear in the industry. So I like to share those with all my conversations I have on these type of engagements. So the next piece here, we're talking about hybrid models. Like, what do I outsource? What do I insource? It really depends on the maturity of the customer. If we're talking about, managed service provider, there's different levels and different things that we need to address, and what makes sense to outsource third party, what makes sense to bring in house. and how that is all kind of put together. So perfect example of some of this stuff is, and I get this quite often, is, hey, we brought on an EDR. We have 5 staff. It is really noisy. What do I do with all this noise? And we have to continually modify it. We have to continually check things, to check checks and balances to make sure the false positives are false positives and not true alerts. And it's very time consuming for our analysts or engineers that are spending more time on screens versus project work and more billable hours. So that might be something that we would bring in, like a third party that has a managed service to do the back end, do all the correlation for them, understanding, and then we can hand those off to that same team, but they don't have to sit there watch screens all day. Same thing with a SIM. So SIMs are very expensive, they're very noisy, and you need a large staff to do something with them. And that's really key. So I've seen some statistics that are out there. I've heard anywhere from you need 10 to 50 people, depending on the size of the company itself and the industry and the vertical you're going into, to manage that SIM and do what is the best and get the best result out of that product itself. I've also seen statistics from, I believe it was FireEye before all the acquisitions and stuff with McAfee, and I forgot what they're even called now. They gave me statistics around that when a SIM's adopted, it's only effective 40% of the time within these industries, and it's only purchased to cover the compliance that's needed for that specific industry, that specific vertical. Meaning, if something happens, they use it to look to find what happened in that environment versus a manual search, which is not really effective. You want to monitor these 24/7 to get more visibility into it. And they use it for auditing purposes for that regulatory compliance. And that's what most people are doing with these, which is not effective. So once again, that could be a perfect scenario. Hey, we have a SIM, or we're thinking about getting a SIM. We understand the complexity, the costs, the staffing requirements, just to get this up and running. That could be the time for a third-party relationship that can do a lot of that back end, that's really well versed, has high-end professionals already established, that can do that as a benefit to the security of the company, but everything else, the auditing purposes and just the visibility, the quick actions on things that are environments because of dwell time, we can narrow these way down from a longer experience of dwell time that can be up to over 200 days. So keep that in mind. So next category we're going to hit here is the effectiveness of the security tools. So the number one point that I make, and this has happened over and over and over, and that's why I use my 2.5-year-old conversation to show what security is versus all these breaches, because I know of 100 breaches and it's scare tactics, but you know what, it is scary. That's the piece. So I try to bring that down a little bit, but make you understand what's really going on in there. So the effectiveness of some of the tools I mentioned, the SIMs, the vulnerability management tools, the EDR tools, a lot of these breaches have had all the best of breed tools in their environments, and then they don't have enough people to do everything that it's pulling off for that tool to be effective. And that's the number one thing, is we need to be able to do more with less staff, but still use those best of breed tools in those environments. And that requires a lot of staff to be able to do that. So just keep that in mind. Personally, I believe the best way to secure yourself, whether you're being reactive or proactive, or you have all the tools, it's continuous monitoring. If you have people watching screens, watching tools continuously on a 24/7 basis, it is going to be much more effective than someone that is going to be there asleep in their bed, getting an alert to do a remote handoff, do stuff, find out what's going on. That can be hours versus minutes to identify things in those environments, and then we can really reduce that dwell time. So just saying that's the next step, that's more of an enterprise full play, is we need that continuous monitoring. If you follow NIST or any of the volunteer frameworks or any of the compliances, you look at one of those controls, it's continuous visibility and monitoring those environments. That requires a SIM, which then requires staff. It's really where I pull that all together. So the largest risks, and this is the stuff that is kind of scary out there. So ransomware as a service, sophisticated breaches as a service. This is the evolution of where things started. So if you look at the origination of, let's say, kind of history lesson of ransomware would come in and say, hey, we got into your systems, we encrypted everything on your environment, everything on your servers. If you want us to unencrypt this, you have to pay us this much of a ransom. Oh man, that's not good. We'll pay it, or hopefully maybe you've got really good backups and we can just wipe it clean and get you up and running within a day or two, or however long it takes. Well, from that, they said, oh, okay, well, let's make this a double extortion attack. We're going to encrypt everything. We're also going to download everything. So if they don't pay, we're not going to unencrypt it, but then we're going to publish everything. It's going to be out in the wild. All your sensitive data, all your IP, it's out there. That's not good either. It's going to help reassure that you're going to pay that ransom. Then we couple on, hey, well, if we're doing those two, let's also do a denial of service attack. Let's make sure that we shut down any ability for anybody to remote in to do anything with this. So they're just layering on more and more extortions to make sure you're paying that, to guarantee they're going to get paid. And that's part of the scary part. The as a service part, as you can see here, this, as I mentioned earlier, this is a business for these entities that are out there, and they are coming to the dark web. They have websites, they have marketing teams, they have, mostly paid in crypto, but they have different ways of addressing this. So there was an article that I just read recently, and you can look it up, and I haven't had the link handy if you want to look at it yourself. So the actual title is Hackers for Hire, Adversaries Employ Cyber Mercenaries. So I'll go through this. I've got some bullets I pulled out, really quick to cover this. So they hire hacker individuals as part of hacker campaigns to do specific tasks that they're subject matter experts in. So they pull a hacker in, they hire them as if they're a contractor. They come do their specialty, whether it's denial of service or data leaks or gaining access or whatever it may be, to maybe remote, desktop protocol, things like that. And then they get paid and they're out. That was one piece of a larger breach that they're not getting paid on. So that's scary that now we have these larger entities hiring hackers contract style, just like you would as a business if you needed a contractor for a specific need. They do the same thing with ransomware. So crime campaigns involve multiple threat actors. They pay them for a portion of that piece of it, whether they're in charge of just gaining access to that specific company and then handing that off, and then the next person does the ransomware encryption piece, and so on and so on and so on. So this is a service now. There's more and more people coming to the table, larger corporations, third-party nation-funded threat actors that are out there as well. So they actually have big offices with hackers that are government funded to do this and hack other countries in order to gain money. So this just gets scarier and scarier as you kind of go through. And then outside of this article, so this is something, you really have to, keep in mind that when you're looking at the actual profits of this, and this was something that was about, I'd say 2 months ago, I heard, they're actually targeting employees within businesses that they can try to corrupt to assist in allowing them to gain access into these business environments. So they could approach an employee, say, hey, when this email comes across, just click that link. That gives them access to where they want to be, and then they can spread laterally. And the incentive is, we're going to give you 5-10% of what we get out of this breach, this ransom, whatever it is. So now they're incentivizing them with money to be part of that hack. Even though obviously you could serve jail time for that, but there's all these new tactics, and some of them are just insider employee threats by someone who would have never thought they would have done that. But you dangle a large enough number in front of their face, click an email, that's something that is kind of discouraging, kind of scary that's out there. So I just want to bring that up. This is kind of how things are emerging right now. I'll stop there once again, see if there's any questions. I think I got 2 more topics here to cover.
Yeah, we got one, but we handled it just basically about the aesthetics of the presentation. But I did want to hit on that. It's what you just spoke about, because and honestly, it makes sense where we're going as far as these threats are coming from, why not make a business out of it? I mean, really, it's profitable today. It really is.
Yeah, sad, but it is. Yeah.
Mhm.
Steal somebody else's hard work. It's
Yeah,
pretty sad.
definitely.
All right. No, love the color. Appreciate that. So I'm going to just cover the last two topics here. So growing attack surface. So something that I've seen is becoming more prevalent. I've heard in the last couple months, something is part of my role with my company Ingram Micro is I also vet out new emerging technologies. And one of them is API security risks. So something we're trying to address, we're trying to adopt new vendors. You might have heard a few of them that are out in the industry that I'm not mentioning because I want to be vendor agnostic, but we don't even have any at Ingram Micro. We're trying to see which ones make the best sense for our business model as well. So when we're talking about growing attack surface API security, this is really focused around SaaS applications. So inherently, SaaS applications are open to communicate with users and other SaaS applications and APIs and everything else to pull data off, but they're not built with security in mind. So it is definitely a new attack vector that's starting to be addressed more. So when you actually adopt and a lot of this was remote workforce and cloud adoption was more prevalent. So I want to add that as well. But the attacks are more open because they're on the radar of these hackers for credentials. So it's not so much like we're going to pull overly sensitive data. We're doing this for authorizations. So if they can gain your passwords to that SaaS application, they might also be able to use that same password for other things that you might have access to as well. As part of this, if you're familiar with OWASP, OWASP, if you're not, you can look them up. They actually added API security to their top 10 back in 2019. So as much as this started to be addressed almost 3 years ago, and mostly because of remote workforce and stuff, it is really starting to be a hotter topic right now. And people are asking for it when they come to me is, how do we address API security? What do we do about this? And really, people are like, oh, well, I haven't heard much about this. Well, if you look in the news and you can Google these, the top breaches for API security where they got initial access into these companies through an API are, and let me list these, Experian, I'm sure you heard of them, Peloton, Google, and John Deere. So yes, those are the big enterprises, and people always say, oh, they're big enterprises, never going to happen to me. Well, that's the ones that are in the news. There's hundreds behind that, all the way down to private personal accounts that people, and like I said, that one that I mentioned, I can mention some about it. They had trusts and other family members had trusts. And that's how they got in, was through a cloud SaaS application to gain access to this trust of this person. And their fear was lateral spread to other family members that through this email and their businesses that they have. So that's really something that came up. So it goes all the way down to the personal level. Yes, this person had quite a bit of money, but it wasn't just a business that was targeted. But yes, they're going after money ultimately or some form of payment. So I just want to throw that out there. That's really kind of what's happening on that attack surface and just to be aware of. The security ROI, this is I've kind of a wrap up, I'd say, of everything we kind of talked about here. So one thing that I really would recommend is conduct risk assessments in these environments. So that's kind of like, okay, we have all these security controls in place. Are they working? Have we run a vulnerability scan in these environments? What assets are we not aware of? If we don't know what it is, we don't know how to categorize them, we don't know how to set policy security to those assets that are in the environment. So we want to make sure we're doing these constant vulnerability scans and management and patch management to make sure we're covered on the latest and greatest, to make sure we're covered from a security perspective and CVEs and different things as far as vulnerabilities that come across. The next piece here is and we discussed this is zero trust stuff. This is access controls, remote admins, remote employees. Are they gaining access to just what their job entails, or do they have more access that they should need, that they might be able to gain things that a hacker might be after, things like that. Monitoring traffic continuously. Mentioned this several times. I really believe in this. This is the next piece. No matter what, we need to really get visibility into all these different avenues, whether it's user-based, network-based, web-based, it's infrastructure as a service. we need to get visibility everywhere. So we need to, maintain this and have, eyes on glass in order to do that. Cybersecurity insurance, not a bad bet. That's why we have insurance on our cars and our lives and our homes, is just for the same purpose. If something happens, we have a peace of mind. Things will be covered. We probably want to maybe address this, and we have some of the controls and securities in place with some of these, products and services in order to do so and address those insurance policies as well. And then I really, really hammer on incident response plans. If you are breached, you need to make sure you have a plan in place. I get people probably every other week, I'd say on average, hair on fire calling me. We just got breached. What do we do? Who do we contact? Just having a plan in place, being like, hey, this is who we call. This is the documentation. This is the first person in line to gain any guidance from that person. Like, all the different steps should be addressed, documented in those environments as well. Not even talking about what happens if the breach happens and forensics and remediation, just a plan, documentation, education of users that needs to be in place prior to the boom of the breach itself. So I'm going to stop there. If there's any questions, and I think that's kind of my time's up in this section at least.
Yeah, we're looking good, Ryan. Not much as far as questions are concerned.
Perfect.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Brian. We're with the respect for time, I'm going to move on to the key insights section for the audience. So how this is going to work is we're just going to kind of outline one of the insights that we found at Arctic Wolf, and then ask the audience a question. So you'll get a polling question. And, so please respond over there. And again, the interaction here will have you enter in for the raffle for the Ember mug. So actually, I'm just going to pose this question to John and Brian as well, in case you want to add any commentary. So it's what's unique and interesting about Arctic Wolf is because we're seeing telemetry, not just from a single source or a single tool. We're collecting this from, unlimited sources and customers all at once. So it's a really great aggregate. And what we found is that 35% of the threats that are coming in, again, of existing customers that already have these tools in place that they think are covered, have chosen to move forward with Arctic Wolf. 35% of these threats that are coming in were detected after 8 p.m. and before 8 a.m. So I think, Brian, this goes back to some of the best practices that you were talking about around, the security models and, of course, the effectiveness of the security tools, in addition to hitting on that cybersecurity staff point as well, right? So the question back to the audience and the group is really, how do you maintain visibility at night? And John, you can trigger that first.
Sure.
Polling question.
So our first question's up there. Go ahead and get an answer. Well, they're answering that, Brian, and you would think that would be, and not having any deeper context into that question, but I would assume we're talking about surveys of US-based companies and personnel for this question. So it would go to show that a lot of those bad actors are working at different time zones than we are. If we're looking at after hours, not just from, the ability to take advantage of our softness at that time, but also based upon, their working hours.
No, that's spot on. I totally agree with that. This doesn't specifically say if those are weekends or holidays. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see that statistic, because I know for a fact, to look at the 4th of July weekend, every single year, it is the #1 breached holiday that I am aware of. Yep. Every single July 2nd, usually whatever that Friday is, if it's that, I think it was Friday this year, you see the breaches start. And then by that holiday on Tuesday, you get back this year, things are too late. It's been a 3-day holiday, and usually it's a skeleton crew. And that's why they're targeting things like that, knowing it's a US-based holiday. And to your point, John, because they're probably on the opposite hour schedule as we are, is why it's usually at night.
All right, I'm going to wrap up this question. The poll is closed for question 1.
All right, cool. And so the second observation that we made here, the industry average time to identify an intrusion is 206 days. And actually, I've seen that go up from here. And this could be for varying reasons as to why, whether it's an outdated, just some sort of security tool, something like that. So that means 206 days, someone's like, within the environment creeping, right? So the question here on the discussion point is, how do you think we could reduce this gap? And so there's a couple polling questions, just, if of the answers, this Q&A, please answer within those.
All right, question is launched out there.
Cool. So go ahead.
So Brian, with this, you're looking at, a lot of these bad actors are getting in, and it's just because they are constantly moving within technology, we're having to catch up with it. So they're taking advantage of windows that we may not necessarily be looking at today, that they've already looked at yesterday, that they're moving forward on. So they can kind of, as Vic put it, creep in our environments as we're going along until we really identify, because typically that's when things catch up with what we're monitoring. Would you agree with that?
100%. So I covered it several times, active monitoring, active scanning. And I talked to a partner the other day. They scan, vulnerability scan annually, once a year, and that's a snapshot. So that day we look pretty good. What about the other 364 days of the year? Yeah. So it really is being active in those environments. And this could be hourly, this could be daily scans. Well, yes, we need to understand what's going on in the environment. Those baselines change management. What has changed since the last time we scanned? That's the key. If they're in the environment for 206 days, man, they can do a lot of damage. That's a crazy number. And I've heard higher as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely a big threat, is, the visibility to existing tools that can give you that, that intel, that telemetry, however you want to put it, is key, in my opinion.
All right, we're going to end off on that question. Okay, Vic.
Perfect. All right. So this is an interesting one. 70% of customers have some PII exposure, and 5.5% have plain text passwords exposed online. And this is really just about, I think everyone's hearing about this, even commercials. I'm starting to see more, not just about enterprises, but them really socializing this to just average users that don't necessarily work for an enterprise. So it just a easy question for y'all. Do you find value in monitoring the dark web?
All right, our question is out there. So what do you see from that standpoint of why someone may not monitor? What would be their reasoning for that?
I think I could think someone would think that they are potentially being monitored in some ways, and not realizing that there's different types of monitoring out there. I think is possible.
Like basically it's somebody else is taking care of it, so I don't need to worry about it.
Right. So is it part of this current solution that you have? Yeah. Is this part of your email solution? Is this part of your maybe your third-party monitoring solution? I mean, there's a couple different types out there. I think could be. So I mean, the answer's got to be yes, right? I mean, I guess there's no wrong answer, but whether or not it's valuable, I'm sure it's probably yes.
So I'll add to that. It's also, I think, a little bit of timing. So let's say you do adopt that new tool and the managed service along with it. What says that your credentials weren't stolen the month prior? And it does take time for it to reach the dark web, and then you don't know those credentials have been compromised. So we are scraping them to identify that, so you know to change your password. It could also be a scenario like that, and it's one of many.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's really that situational as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Cool.
question 3 is done.
Cool. We're almost wrapped up here. So the last couple questions. So this observation: 87% of security leaders believe their organization is falling short in addressing cyber risk. So question to the audience: what do you see as a security challenge in your organization today? And this can
Questions
just
out
be
there?
of the choice options, just the top that we see as well are outlined there.
And Brian, to that fact, from what I've seen, experience, and talking to people, it's more of that higher echelon of management and C-level that are well aware of this, that this keeps them awake at night. Whereas we have from there down, they're aware of it, but may be more reactive in their systems that they're doing today, that it's not a priority at this time. That's some of the things I'm seeing.
100%. As many people as I talk to, I still see more reactive than proactive security out there.
Yeah.
We're trying to adopt and change that, but I'm only one person. I can only talk to so many people a year. But by far, that is very accurate. The reactive, we're going to throw a firewall and endpoint at them and we're good, is not enough anymore. You need those proactive tools to be proactive, looking through different things, scraping the dark web or doing active scans, correlating that information, especially like the spirit management interfaces. If you've got 20 vendors in your environment and you're trying to manage those all separately, that's very time consuming. And if something happens on one, then you have to manually correlate to the other and try to find those findings. Time consuming, and as well as back to my point about staff. You need a lot of staff to be proactive. So yeah, I think that would cover it for the most part.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Next one.
Final question here. So 40-day average increase to patch critical vulnerabilities in 2020. I'm sure there's an updated stat for 2021 there, but the question is, how do you currently discover and patch critical vulnerabilities in your organization? Great question, kind of hard to answer, but we have 3 choice options on there for you. And then we'll just quickly wrap this. That was our last polling question.
I know from our standpoint at XenTegra, we're very proactive in alerts and notifications that we're getting from our partners we work with. And we are very reactive in notifying our customers to make sure that they're aware of what's going on, to be able to take advantage of what needs to be done, either to protect themselves or and do that forensics, or handle the aftermath of something that occurred to them already.
Hey, it's the best approach. You got to be on top of those. I know I'm part of SANS. I watch the feeds every single morning. There's 10 new CVEs, threats, vulnerabilities found every single day. And those can be with the softwares you're running. And then people are like, oh, and I'll just throw something out there like, oh, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm not using containers. Well, inherently you probably are. You just don't know it. So that kind of stuff just needs to be addressed more readily. And it sounds like you guys are on top of that, which is, key one. Yeah.
And we're also seeing too, a lot of the old school ones kind of making comebacks every once in a while, because, we thought they were dead and gone, and, we just progress forward to take a look at the next thing, and yep, boom, they get us again.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause there's how many signatures are out there and they cycle through and they come back, or they're polymorphic and it's just a slight tweak, so you don't identify it again. They just reuse that. Why not? Whatever's the easiest path, the least resistance, they're going to take. So it's a valid point.
All right, Vic. So we just close off the poll.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know we're out of time today, so just a high level Arctic Wolf summary as well for those of you who haven't checked us out. I would, love for the next step out of this call to be have a conversation with, reach out to John and his team, have a conversation and set up a meeting with Arctic Wolf. We'd love to be able to talk to you about how we can solve a lot of these observations and meet those cybersecurity best practices that Brian was talking about. We provide multiple solutions like managed detection and response, managed risk, which would cover that vulnerability management piece that we talked in depth about, and also managed security awareness. So we have, we have a very large organization with 1,600 plus employees, and our SOC is perfect for enterprise organizations to help you all reduce the noise, improve that skills shortage, and get the response time drastically lower down to, sub 30 minutes. So that being said, I will pass it back to John to wrap this up. And
Sure thing.
floor is yours.
Just going to do real quick here, folks. Q&A. So if you have any questions that came up, if we didn't get them addressed or something pops up afterwards, please feel free to reach out. Some quick follow-up on our end from XenTegra. Our events, I forgot to change July to August, but this is August. Printer Logic webinar on the 17th of this month. Then we have a Citrix webinar on the 31st of this month. Our workshops and boot camps for August, the 18th and iGel workshop that we have running, as well as Nutanix Files workshop, which will be on the 19th of the month. I would also want to reemphasize the Ember mug is going to be a giveaway. Thank you for those that participated. Arctic Wolf will be doing that drawing and following up with you afterwards of our winner. You'll be notified and be able to get your mug. And what I want to do is thank Brian, Vic, both for being here today. I really appreciate this. Also, being able to have our partners come and share to the community is huge, a huge thing that we love to be able to do. This falls in line with our ideology of enablement for you and for your customers. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for another Webinar Wednesday, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to the XenTegra team for hosting today. Have a lovely rest of the day, everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye now.